with what we are talking about today. And for all of you, we will start recording this topic. So when you want, when you don't like that, please switch your video, switch your video, and but blab in this session. So we will have about 40 minutes for the talk, and we'll have after that a small question and answer session, about 5 to 10 minutes, something like that. But Patricia and Kurt, they will stay after this session after 6 p.m. So they will answer your question. I will discuss with you for the next time, for the time after the 6 p.m. So thank you very much. It is your stage, Patricia and Kurt. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm Patricia. That's Kurt. Happy birthday, your COVID baby, which is kind of funny to me. And I'm hoping that Kurt and I can join you all next year in person, and Scrum.org can sponsor the cake, and Fad, he will sponsor the champagne, just to make sure that I show up. He knows that. So I hope that we can do that next year. To be transparent, we probably have more than 40 minutes of material, but we'll inspect and adapt. And of course, we are here after the hour. So there's that. It's morning for me. Of course, it's evening for you. So I do thank you for spending your Friday listening to Kurt and me talk. To Kurt and I talk. So when we're thinking about, especially for the online Scrum community, I've talked about evidence-based management in a different way, and Kurt's talked about it from keeping the notion of agile from losing its why. I've talked about it in terms of keeping Scrum from losing its why, and I hope that that is going to be something that resonates with you, especially as you're working with your organizations and teams. I don't think you really need to know much more than who we are. It's because Fad gave us a wonderful introduction. So I'm just going to skip that. And we're going to get right into it. So Scrum.org look a lot like you. This was when we came together in March. And I just like to think about where we started and how we've gone on to online and everything's like this. Anyways, okay, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do, just to make sure that you're awake and you're not drunk or sleeping, is to ask you this question. So I propose to you this, and what we're going to do is we're going to, Andreas is going to help me have you guys in small breakout groups. But imagine that your organization has started on an agile or digital transformation, and they want to know, you want to know, right? So you're a good coach or consultant, and you say, hey boss, what are you trying to achieve with the agile transformation? And your management says, we want to just cut costs. What is the best way, or how would you respond? So if we can get us into breakout groups and just talk about how you would respond to this question for maybe, let's do 2 minutes. Let's try that, okay? And so we'll see you on the other side. So join your breakout session. I should set a timer.
That would be good. I don't know if you picked up when Fad was talking about the future talks that he mentioned. I think the last talk was something about Agile and Pippi Longstrump,
yes.
And the in English that would be Pippi Longstocking. It's that Swedish girl story.
True, yes.
Are there people that just joined, or are these people left over?
I just joined and I'm using Zoom from an Android app. I'm not even sure if it supports breakout rooms.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
Could be.
Do you want to chat with us?
I'm fine listening in.
Okay.
I'm sorry I was late too. I registered this afternoon and I didn't receive the email, and only when I wrote where is the link to the session there was an autoresponder where the link came. So
Well, we're glad that you made it.
yeah, me too.
The invitation that I've made to the groups is an organization has started you on an agile transformation, and so you ask, what are you trying to achieve with agile transformation? And then the management responds, we want to cut costs. And so the question is, how would you respond? What's the best way?
Yeah, I see the slide. I thought about it. I'm a software developer, not an agile coach. But there is a similar argument about going to the cloud. Many companies also hope to reduce costs, but that's not the main focus and not the main benefit from doing it.
Welcome back. Did that conversation sound similar to something maybe you've experienced at your work at all, or had to think about? Yeah. Okay.
No. Usually they ask, or the idea is they want to be faster.
We'll talk about that too.
Yeah. All right. So after 6 months, the manager comes back and says, are we successful? So you can imagine, we've gone, it could be anything, right? This is agile. We were just talking with Stefan about going to the cloud. Are we successful? How might you show success? How would you show them? So Andreas, if we could do 3 minutes this time. After 6 months, we want to know, are we successful in this transformation? Are we successful in what we've done? How do you demonstrate that success? What do you say? Okay, 3 minutes. See you soon.
Anyway, the Pippi Longstocking presentation would actually be pretty interesting, I'm sure.
Yes, it will, and the speaker is very interesting because he was manager of a real industry company, and he did an agile transition of his complete company,
great.
and I think he has so much to tell us, and he's so funny guy. That's also the Longstocking topic.
Yeah.
Telling him.
Yeah,
I'm so
exactly.
happy that
that sounds like a really interesting talk, and he's probably doing it in German. Otherwise, I would say I would like to join in. So it's a good story.
So there's still some people left in that room, or maybe I think you don't want to go into breakout sessions or join us here. Or
no,
if
because
if you have any technical problems, you can tell us.
Yeah. Usually we stay out of the breakout sessions just because we don't want to act as a damper for the discussion. Sometimes if we're there, then people are looking to us to sort of lead the discussion, and we don't want to do that. So
I think he meant for the people left.
Yes.
Yeah.
Last 30 seconds.
Welcome back. Getting back in. Wow, I haven't heard that in a long time. Okay, welcome back. How was that conversation? Have you had that before?
This is much more stressful than being in the office.
I'm going to ask you a favor because I'm curious. In the chat for Zoom, could you just type some of your answers that you discussed? How would you demonstrate success, right? This is, I think, a question we get a lot, and it's not an easy question.
Well, one answer would be never will be done with the transformation, probably, but we can maybe tell them if we, in the beginning, started with some metrics, we might be able to show a difference. If we thought about it in the beginning.
That's true too, right? Okay, so there's a lot coming in and a lot of different answers. One of the things that was interesting that Frank just said was about, having the understanding of the measurements in the beginning. And I think the interesting point here from this quote, what gets measured gets done, is that we have to be mindful of what we're setting up when we're measuring in the beginning. If we're looking at an agile transformation, I'm going to pose that agile transformation is not the goal, right? What did we really want? That's what we would be measuring. And a lot of the times what we see is that it's, okay, we have number of Scrum teams, number of product owners, number of Scrum masters we have to hire, number of coaches, etc. All those different things. And so what Kurt and I have in the evidence-based management guide is a suggestion of how we can start to think about those measurements. It is not wrong to think about number of Scrum masters, right? But these things fall into different categories. So activity is, what is the stuff that we do? What does an organization do, right? Lines of code, maybe, or how long we're writing code, how much time we spend in the meetings. Output is things that we produce, and an outcome is the thing that we are looking for to satisfy a customer. And so there's a lot of text here. To make it simpler, think of it this way, right? So if you're familiar with our professional Scrum user class, the example we have is activity. I am digging a hole. I'm digging. The output is the well where I can get water. The outcome is that people can get water to drink or to wash, their hands or something like that. When we think about outcomes and when we talk about outcome-driven goals, we are not thinking about only ourselves. We are thinking about what does the customer actually want. So if we want an agile transformation, why do we want that? Why do you want to cut costs? Well, I want to do that because the competition, but why are we doing that? And of course, we talk about the technique of 5 whys. What you're doing is a little bit of analysis in there, right? So, be smart about that when you're talking to your management or a customer. If you keep asking them why, they might get aggravated to you. Ask some powerful questions. What are you looking to do? So there's just different ways that we approach this, and we know this in our backgrounds. The thing is that often success is measured in output. They're going to say, what have you done? Show me all the things. And that doesn't tell us if we're actually adding value to an organization, right? So if this is the online Scrum community and we think about agility, what we think about at the end is really this notion of value and business agility and able to achieve that value. But if we're looking at progress, always just progress, what are we doing? How many miles am I running? We're missing the point. And this is really causing a misalignment in organizations, especially as you think about something like innovation and scaling. So when we're innovating and it's getting good, what a company tries to do is just add process and scale that. And it's always going to have this tension in between. And we can see that. So this is a little bit old, from 2017. Kurt and I used to work at Forrester Research. So we like data, obviously. But there are a lot of organizations, and I've showed this, for a couple of years, but it's still true when we dig into it, is that we think about the business priorities that are customer focused. The developers who are working on the team, they're not really aware of them, right? So even when we talk about how much agility are you really pursuing, so when we look at the state of Agile, when we look at these other reports, what this graph here says that the level of Agile adoption is only skin deep. For me, we're saying all these things, but there's still no alignment. We're not working together and talking about the same goals. And even those types of goals are going to be a certain conversation. So like you guys were saying, focus on the goals. Understand that when we're working in a complex situation, obviously we think about empiricism, and that means we need evidence. We need data to tell us how we're doing. So that we can make progress toward those goals. And that's really what underlines evidence-based management. One of the things that we added actually to the guide last year was this notion of goals and empiricism. We used to just talk about you should be measuring value. And then people would come back and say, Patricia, we're measuring. And I said, that's good. And they say, now what? Well, hopefully you do something with that information and you learn and you move forward, right? So really think about how this is thinking about in a complex situation. We want to have a direction. We need goals, empiricism, and evidence. Okay.
All right. Thank you for that. So talk a little bit more about the goal aspect of this. And if you think about what any Agile approach does is that it's doing this experiment loop. It's starting with some sort of idea, or what we might call a hypothesis in the scientific method, starting with some sort of idea about how we can improve a condition or improve our progress toward a goal. And so if you think about what we're doing in Scrum, every single product backlog item is a kind of hypothesis about how you can improve the value for a customer or user of the product. So that would be sort of a tactical goal that you would do every single sprint. You've got a sprint goal, that's a tactical goal. Over a course of a number of sprints, maybe many sprints, you have more intermediate goals. You can think of that maybe as a product goal. So in the last version of the Scrum Guide, we introduced product goals. And then over the long term, across potentially many products, there are strategic goals. So what we've added to EBM is this notion of these 3 different levels of goals. And during every, what in the EBM guide, we talk in relatively general terms. We don't talk about Scrum. But if you think about a sprint as an improvement cycle, every single improvement cycle is executing this experiment loop, trying to seek toward those goals. And the reason why in this picture, the goals look like they're moving around a little bit is that you're not only inspecting and adapting your progress toward the goals, but you're inspecting and adapting on the goals themselves. So you might find through feedback from customers that some major product feature that you were thinking of isn't really valuable, and that the customer would rather have you solve some other problem for them. So evidence-based management is this framework for seeking toward these goals using empiricism. And in the course of that, we have a concept called key value areas that helps you focus on different areas of inspecting and adapting. So if we go on to the next slide, these 4 key value areas are, we just read clockwise, unrealized value, current value, time to market, and ability to innovate. So I'm going to talk about each one of these in more detail. But if you go on to the next one, we'll sort of start with the things that are more sort of showed up a lot in the chat when you indicated what your goals were. So things like being more efficient or reducing cost or things like that fall into this category called the ability to innovate. And it looks at how effective the organization is at improving the value that it's delivering. So an example of an ability to innovate measure would be something like, well, we talk about the product cost, the innovation rate. And so the innovation rate is how much do you spend on innovation relative to your total spend? And so for many organizations in the past, traditional organization, this might be something like 30%. So only 30% of the work that you do is doing new innovative work. 70% is spent on basically maintenance, keeping the lights on. So innovation rate might give you a sense of how innovative you are. You could also look at things like how many interruptions do you get during the day on average. That would also tell you how much time you're spending on work versus non-value added work. Time to market, this other key value area, is focused on what most of you would say going faster. So how long does it take to deliver new value? And you could look at cycle time, from idea to the point where the customer receives some sort of benefit. You could look at, we have an example measure in the appendix for the EBM guide that's called the time to pivot. And so that would be the time it takes for the organization to go from receiving some information about some strategy that it's got is either wrong or incomplete to the point where it actually responds to that. So let's say a competitor comes out with a major new capability, you start to lose customers. How long does it take you to respond to that, come out with something equal or better? So as I mentioned in the EBM guide, we have an appendix with a bunch of example measures. They aren't all of the measures you could think of, and different measures you would have will tell you different things. So if we go on to the next slide, the question that I would ask is be more efficient or deliver faster a good goal? And Patricia earlier mentioned this question about why. So my general approach on any kind of assertion like, we want to be more efficient or deliver faster is to ask why. And if the answer to that question is something else, because it will enable us to do something else, it will enable us to better serve customers, or it will enable us to compete better in the market, then that other thing is really the goal. So oftentimes goals that are stated in terms of these two areas, these two key value areas that we've kind of labeled organizational capability, are sort of enablers for something greater, or enablers for something more important. So if you go on to the next slide, if you start by asking why, when somebody says a goal that looks like it's in the ability to innovate or time to market area, then what you'll usually find, if you go on to the next slide, is that the real goals for agile transformation are usually driven by something else. And so not always though, and so I'd answer the question this way: if the goal is to be more efficient, maybe you have completely satisfied customers, you have no new opportunities in the marketplace, then of course it makes sense to be more efficient so you can be more profitable, provide a better return to your shareholders, maybe provide a better, focus on other areas like employee satisfaction. But oftentimes I would say in our world today, that's not the case, that we almost always have opportunities in these other two areas. So let me talk about these. Current value is pretty easy to understand. It would be the value that you currently deliver to customers. And so you could measure this in a rough way by things like Net Promoter Score. But you could also just ask customers, what do you think? Are you happy with our product? And various ways of asking that question. The unrealized value is something we'll come to later, but it effectively says, are there things that you could do for your customers that you're not doing today? And so there's some sort of gap between what you're doing today and what your customer potentially would like you to do. And that represents a market opportunity. So usually what we find is that when you really ask the questions why about go faster or be more efficient or reduce cost, you find that there's something else in one of these areas lurking. So if we go on, and so the thing about these key value areas is that you can't take any one of them in isolation. So if you improved your speed, but value dropped, but current value dropped, that would be a bad thing. You cut in quality in some way. Or if you improved your ability to innovate, but the customer value, current value dropped, that wouldn't be good. And so we want to try to take a holistic, balanced view, and that's why you see these in more of an ellipse here, because this balance notion is important. So move on to the next slide. when you think about goals, oftentimes you hear this acronym SMART, the specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-bound. And so the question is, should all goals be SMART? If we go on to the next slide, we can see that something like a strategic goal isn't necessarily going to be actionable. It may be very aspirational. It may be very sort of far out there, like, you know, we want to eradicate cancer, or maybe even a specific disease. We'd like to eradicate COVID. That would be a nice goal. But we don't know when we could do that. We don't know if it's realistic to do that. Maybe we can't actually do it. And we don't know how long it will take. So tactical goals, i.e. things like sprint goals, are always specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-bound. But the farther you get into the future with the intermediate goals and strategic goals, the less actionable, realistic, and time-bound they're likely to be. So we'll leave it with that, and we're going to talk about some different aspects of goals now.
This is just a suggestion, but I know that with the addition of all the goals that we're seeing in the Scrum guide and in the EBM guide, you know, we're trying to make a sense of where all these things live. And this is an attempt, so we have the goal onion, to look at how goals can align in the organization. This may be true, or it may not be, because your organization might be a startup that's just focused on a product and making that product live. So that's the strategic goal lives there. But when we think about how the goals live from the EBM guide in purple, we have the tactical goal, and that's really looking at the daily goal, the sprint goal, and the product goal. And then we get into the intermediate, which gets a little bit more strategic, and then you have the strategic goal. Nexus is Scrum.org's answer for how do you scale Scrum. So that's going to be looking at the Nexus sprint goal. So there's just another extra goal for you. But the reason that I wanted to include this is so that you have a visualization of how would you think about this in the company. The thing that I think I would want to stress, and of course in our product owner class, you can start talking about visioning and all those things. How would that line up? And that's for another day. But the thing that I would want to make sure that I stressed is that it's not that we're looking for a decomposition of goals, right? So you remember this diagram, it's about we have a goal that's out there. What are the things that we are going to try to do to try to achieve those goals? So this is a representation of how those things can line up. I want to make sure actually that I give you guys an example of what this has looked like, because it doesn't go, oh, they use EBM, they're good, right? There's always a long initiative that comes with something that we want to change. And so we actually just worked with a customer, we've released this case study, and it's about how they use Nexus. But when they were looking for what they were trying to do, they were working with a company, and it's in the health industry. And what this company was asked to do is, we have a legacy product and we need you to replace it. So you go, that's not the best way to save money. What are you really trying to do? And they needed to replace this product because what it did was it was a product that they were using for healthcare workers. And the healthcare workers were using this when they go to help senior citizens to get services. And so there was this 20-year thing. They didn't want to change it. But they started to make these little changes. And what they said was, well, what we're really trying to do here is that we're trying to give these care managers, the people who actually are using this product with the seniors, more time to actually work with them. There were all these bugs, and they were caught up doing a lot of administration and all this stuff. And so obviously, imagine how long it takes to slowly adapt and change a legacy product. They did this, and what they started to monitor was all the other sorts of measurements that you do. But in the end, what they found was that their 1,200 care managers, they were able to reduce 20 hours per month that they used to manually have to be in the field trying to fix bugs and all that stuff. So it's really thinking about things from an outcome and different goals, and actually who is using that product that becomes real, right? So obviously they had goals, obviously, from trying to change the product, all the things that they have to do. We have to get up to speed, but they always kept the end user in mind and the different data that we have that can support that. So that's something that lives out there that shows that as we start to move from Scrum to Nexus, and then what we can actually track from the data. All right, so this is the online Scrum community. So how does EBM actually help teams and organizations who use Scrum? What's interesting is that Kurt and I sit here and we draw things on whiteboards and we put up stickies. And every time we do that, we say, just looks like Scrum. And when we think about what Scrum can actually do, and when we're looking at that, even when you talk about like portfolio management, we say that everything that we come has a spirit of Scrum, has a spirit of empiricism, the notion of inspection and adaptation. But there's three elements that we would say, if you're thinking about EBM and Scrum, what are the babies that you get? Well, it can help you really continuously improve your product value, the team capability, and organizational performance. And we'll go into those three things. So think about this. We work in sprints. Every sprint is an opportunity to improve product value. We already know that, right? How so? Well, if you think about the Scrum framework, there are events that are very focused on improving product value. That's where we look at that, right? So this notion of obviously the daily Scrum, where we're doing today, but the sprint review and sprint planning. And the reason that I would bring up sprint planning is because we can ask that question of what is really the purpose of sprint planning? What are you really trying to do? And if you think about the three topics, the first topic in the Scrum Guide is really about what's valuable about this sprint, right? What are we trying to do? And so for us, when we think about how we can bring that into current value of the key value areas, the question there is what value is being delivered by the organization, right? So it's apt for us to think about what is the value that we're doing? What are the PBIs that make sense here, maybe from a product owner perspective? And so if we think about PBIs, right, it doesn't mean that we have to do them, but they are experiments. It's a hypothesis that this will add value. So this is one of the things that Kurt and I have used for years and that we like, and it's adapted from Jeff Gotthealth and Josh Simon's Lean UX. But if we think about for each PBI, who we're actually trying to serve, the outcome for it, and how are we going to know if this works? This is a really terrific conversation to say, how is this contributing to the current value of this product, let's say, right? We're thinking about Scrum here. And Kurt and I always talk about, and he and I stress this in different ways, but we've showed this, and I've literally seen a CIO goes, we will now write all of our PBIs this way. And we said, no, but it's important that you have the conversation, right? To start to think about, if you think that this is this as an experiment, what are you going to do? How is this contributing to current value? And usually it's, Kurt's going to talk about unrealized value, but really looking at current value. Kurt?
Yeah. So the other thing to think about is that Sprint has kind of a dual personality. It's certainly focused on improving current value, but it also is the opportunity for the team to improve its performance. And so if we go into the next slide and do the same kind of thing to say what Scrum events are focused on improving team capability. Well, we certainly get lots of information through the course of the sprint that then gets focused and collected in the sprint retrospective, and the team thinks about, well, what could we do to improve? And then some of those improvements then get folded into sprint planning. They become perhaps PBIs. And then the daily Scrum itself is an opportunity for the team to inspect and adapt on how things are going, and what could we do to improve our ability to deliver today, what things are blocking us and what things might we need help on. So I think of this inspecting and adapting. It's not just inspecting and adapting on the product, but it's inspecting and adapting on the team's performance itself. So if you think about looking at it that way, this dual nature of Scrum, provides us with that improving the product, improving the team, but there's also an aspect of improving the organization, which we'll talk about later. So we go on to the next slide. We've already talked about, next one too. I think those are duplicates. So we've already talked about these two different KBAs that are related to the team's capability, ability to innovate, and time to market. And so some different things that a team could look at, if we move on to the next slide, is that it might be really important. In fact, this is almost one of the first things that I do when I worked with teams, is to say, well, if we're looking for areas to improve, let's look at our value stream map and try to figure out what's value added activity and what's non-value added activity. And let's go sort of end to end from idea to customer and map this out. And so this identifies a bunch of different things. It identifies some things related to the team's ability to innovate and things that ultimately, if you remove them, affect the team's time to market. But it's important, I think, to do this exercise, to do this value stream map, because sometimes the improvements are counterintuitive. And the example I'll give is a telecom company that I worked with. And they were bringing me in, this is when I was a Forrester analyst, they were bringing me in to give them some ideas about how they could automate their build and test process. And I suggested that they do this value stream mapping exercise, and they got the right people together and we did it. It took a couple of hours, so it wasn't really it didn't take a lot of time to do. But their initial feeling is, again, that they needed to improve the build and test process. So implementing things like continuous integration and maybe some continuous delivery practices. But what they found when they did the value stream map is that 70% of their overall cycle time was spent waiting for someone else to make a decision. So, making a decision about getting a testing environment, making a decision about, the releasability of the product, making a decision about, getting somebody in to help with maybe security aspects or other things. And so it was eye-opening for them, because if they had gone ahead and spent all this time and effort improving their CI process, it would have had, I think, about a less than 6% improvement on the overall cycle, whereas 70% was being spent on other things. And so their takeaway was that we need to work on the overall, essentially, handoffs in the organization and become more of a cross-functional team and have more empowerment to make certain kinds of decisions, as opposed to just bringing in automation. So it was an eye-opening experience and something that was well worth the couple of hours that we spent doing it. If we go on the next slide, there's another illustration of a kind of measure that you might want to think about. And so there's an inclination on the part of most product owners, is that if you have low customer satisfaction, what you need to do is add more features. But here's an interesting data from an organization where we looked at what percentage of the customer base was on the latest release, one release back, 2 releases back, 3 releases back. And here I mean major releases, not minor releases. So if you look at this, 68% of the customers were on version 7 or version 6. So if you added more features to version 8, that wouldn't necessarily move your customer satisfaction very much. So for this particular team, the right question to ask is, what could we do to get customers to move from older versions to newer versions, so that we don't have to spend time maintaining all those old versions, and we can also basically have a greater impact on customer satisfaction sooner. So, the answer on what you should measure really depends on what you're trying to achieve. And so you need to have some data to help you make those decisions. So in this particular case, you'd look at, the improving the installed version, actually, not having to maintain 3 or 4 back versions would improve your time to market. It would improve your ability to innovate, and it would also improve your current value.
Yeah.
So,
Kurt, can I give an example?
Yeah.
So we were working with a PST in the US, and he was working with, this is recorded. He was working with someone in the healthcare industry, and they had this exact thing. And he brings evidence-based management whenever he works with companies. And he had this thing where what they did was they started looking, and all the executive was really looking at was current value. And it was that story where they said, okay, we understand current value, customers not happy, employees are not happy. Let's build more stuff, right? So he's exactly, let's add, it's fun, let's do that. And he went and he examined the installed version index, and they found something very similar to this. And he said, listen, you are spending a lot of money supporting that, supporting it at all different levels. And when they went there and they addressed that issue, right away, they started to save $10,000 a month. So there's this calculation of when you're only looking at one KVA, you can miss some of this information. And when you look at this information and now you have real data to show back of how that affects, that's why the 4 KVAs in a balance is a really interesting thing to acknowledge and to think about. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's always great to look at examples. So if we take our view out a little bit beyond the intermediate goal of a product goal or a team's improvement, so these KVAs also relate to organizational goals. So if we look at the next one, we talked a little bit about unrealized value. And the way that I like to visualize that, if we go on to the next slide, is that the opportunities an organization has for improving their market share or improving revenue or improving their overall position really are summarized by this picture. And that there's some current experience that the customer has or a potential customer has, and there's a desired experience. And the gap between those, if you can close that, that represents an opportunity to get more revenue. Because you are solving a problem for the customer that they can't solve in any other way. So, you know, the current experience, the desired experience, the satisfaction gap is really fundamentally the idea behind unrealized. And so if you think about ways to measure this, at a very coarse level, you could measure your market share, but a much better way to get at the satisfaction gap is just, again, talk to people, talk to potential customers, talk to not only your current customers, but also maybe people who didn't buy your product, to understand, you know, why didn't you buy the product? What did our product not do that you would like to have do? Maybe a competitor does this, or maybe nobody does this. So that satisfaction gap is really kind of a key idea. So if we move on, actually, I think the next one is back to you, Trish. Sorry about that.
It's like we're playing ping pong.
Yeah.
I think usually at this, so we've shared a lot of information. I'm gonna talk about it this way. So we've talked about goals, and we've talked about empiricism, and we've talked about this need for goals because there's a disconnect. And usually at this point, people are probably thinking about, how does OKRs work with EBM? How does this make sense? What are the metrics that we need, right? So I'll just tell you the questions that we would get asked. And I think when we think about organizations and the complex work that we're doing, and we're saying we need a focus. So we need some sort of focus that's aligned. So there's goals. And then of course we want to see if we're hitting those goals. And the way that we can do that is to understand if we have some sort of measurement on it, right? The thing that is missing is that even with those things, we cannot predict the environment and the behavior that's produced. So when we are in complex situations, what's missing is empiricism. So again, that's why I'm trying to say, when you're thinking about complexity and we don't know what's going to happen with those things, we don't know what's going to happen with the goals, we don't know what's going to happen with the people and how they behave, what environment is created. And we don't know what happens if we just throw metrics at them, right? If we just threw metrics at them, how would that influence the work? We look at those 3 things together in terms of goals, measurement, behavior, which means that we're looking at goals, empiricism, and evidence. So they still say, so what should you measure? So in the evidence-based management guide, we have key value areas, and we have key value measures in an appendix. Those are suggestions. There are different ones that people use if they're in a marketing organization versus, you know, they're focused on software. But the thing that we want to drive is to think about these principles, that what you gather is going to inform you whether you have achieved your goals. And when we talk about evidence-based management, actually even when you think about evidence-based medicine or evidence-based management as a management framework, it's saying take the best evidence that you know and make a decision, right? This is what we do in our lives, hopefully on a daily basis. And what makes that relevant now is that means that if your goals change, then your measurement too. I think a lot of times what I see in organizations is we go, here's everything, here's our dashboard. And there's not a housekeeping, there's not any refresh on them. And I would expect that depending on the data. And so this means that from an organization's perspective, that would vary. And for a team's perspective, that would vary, right? Because it's going to tell them, are we making progress? Are we going backward? There's some things that they need to know. And it really goes back to thinking again about the activity, output, and outcome. How are we measuring those three things? So I hope that this can get into some other conversations, but that helps kind of think about what is the evidence that we use. This wand diagram, that little snake. How do we know where we're moving? Do we move back or forth? Because ultimately, what we'll learn is that goal correct in the right place? And I think a lot of the times we put our goals and objectives in stone, and that wouldn't have worked in COVID, right? We have to change. We have to do all these other things. So there's a lot of summary points here, but don't pursue agility just to be more agile. That's not the goal. When you're doing something like want to go faster, or we just want to go up to, or we want to go up to the cloud, or we want to do all these things, understand why. Think about goals in terms of tactical, intermediate, and strategic. It's a time dimension. And then obviously use empiricism to improve your agility by considering them from a point of value, right? So if we take those four things together, Ken Schwaber, who owns Scrum.org, he talks about that as really understanding business agility and business value, taking those four things together and thinking about how you can start to use this with your Scrum teams, thinking about those lenses and how they can improve product value, team capability, or organizational performance. There are a lot of resources for you on the scrum.org website. You have people at the online Scrum community that can help you, the organizers here. We have talked about the thing that you might find interesting is we have some webinars. There are webinars, for instance, of EBM in the field. What are the challenges they face? What have they done? Investing for Business Agility is a white paper that's been very popular because it says, if you understand what value means to you now as an organization, as a team, as a group of teams, how do I invest for it? And then we've talked about, Kurt has a great blog about OKRs, the good, the bad, and the ugly, which is just adding the value dimension. And I'll be doing a webinar on that later. There's a couple other things that you should know that I think Andreas, he posted before, is that we have an open assessment on scrum.org, which means it's a free assessment for you to look at. And we also have a professional agile leadership EBM certification, assessment certification on our website. So we've been using that to assess and share our ideas. We're also working on a class. Andrina has been great with running some experiments with us in Germany, and we're continuing to run a few experiments now. And we're looking probably the second half of the year, you'll see a 1 day, whatever that means now in our world, 1 day, 7-hour class, a workshop that will be very interactive for people to go through this and to go through the thinking, and more so have the tools that you would use to be able to influence your organization to get them to have those conversations. And that is great timing for us to ask questions.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Kurt. Thank you very much. So, thank you very much for your talk. We still have two minutes, I think. And the next one, before we start with the questions, let's give a hint about our next events, what we have. I think in 1 week, at the 7th of May, we will have our peer coaching session. So you need to start early in the morning to have a seat there with our colleagues there. So when you have an issue, a problem, you want to talk with them. So I have that small group, they can help you with your issue and they will coach you, and that's what you have. Either we will see each other in our regular time, the 15th of May, with the last topic, or the last talk in our currently topic about Scrum Integrated Umfeld, the Medizinprodukte with Olaf. So that is about the two next things what we have. Either we will be in contact with us, with Patricia and with Kurt, either in LinkedIn or on Twitter. Thank you very much When you want, please give Patricia and Kurt feedback for the session. And I think Andreas or Sergey will send now the link for the feedback you can give. I wish you a lot of that you can have one of our tickets and you can meet Patricia and Kurt and our Karlsruhe and Fikra-Tag. Have a lot of luck. So Patricia, Kurt, we will stop now the recording and we